Blackhawks Breakaway podcast for 𝗙cie with 𝗨𝗏 𝗟𝗠𝗀. I am Pat Boyle. We're brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. Find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. Charlie, you were under the weather around trade deadline day and over the weekend. How you feeling?
I'm feeling much better. It was very weird. It was like the first Blackhawks game I hadn't watched live, and I can't even remember. And it was a tough day to miss because we had trade deadline day on Friday. Kyle Davidson spoke. Obviously missing the game. It was a tough weekend. I'm feeling much better. I told Troy that the real reason why I actually missed the last two games is because I faked my own illness because I needed a break from him because he was poking fun at me all the last two games, but I'm feeling much better and ready to go.
All right. Well, since you were under the weather, we didn't get your reaction to Joe Veleno being acquired from Detroit for Mrazek and Craig Smith. And the big news on that day is that Ryan Donato stayed put. So I'll let you have the floor and react to that.
Yeah. So I was surprised. It felt like after that Wednesday game against Ottawa, like Ryan Donato continued to perform well, scored a goal in that game. Ironically, Ottawa was one of the teams that was scouting Donato heavily because they were dead last going into that game in even strength goals. And Ryan Donato was top 15 at that point. And so I said on the postgame show on Wednesday night, feels more likely than not that Donato is going to get traded. And when the trade deadline passed and he was still part of the roster, a part of me felt like the Hawks had maybe elevated their price on Donato as the months leading into the trade deadline. Because at first we were saying, if you're just going to get a third round pick for Donato, no point in moving him, just keep him. Well, then it elevated, you got to get at least a second round pick for Donato or else you're keeping him. And then the asking price became Hawks are asking for a first round pick or they're not going to move him. And so the price just kept elevating the more that Ryan Donato had elevated his performance. And so on some level, I'm not surprised that the Hawks held on to him, especially if it kind of leads to a contract extension. But at the same time, there was a report out there that the Hawks didn't even get offered a second round pick. I'm not sure I buy that. Like I find that hard to believe. If Donato couldn't fetch that, I think the Hawks just overvalued Donato to a point where if they weren't going to get a first round pick for him, he's far more valuable on the roster and to be a piece moving forward for this team versus just getting another pick for him.
Yeah, I think a few things are in play here. One, it's kind of universally thought that this upcoming draft is not the strongest of drafts. I do believe that they elevated their asking price to a 1. I thought that was solidified. We had Frank Seravalli on a couple times leading up to the deadline, and he mentioned first round pick twice. And the first time I heard it, I like double clutched and like kind of gave him like, really? And so that made me feel like, okay, it's out there. The asking price is a 1. It's a seller's market. It was, there weren't the volume of deals at this trade deadline, but there was quality out there. And so, and I think that they put that first round pick on him. I think that was a little pricey, to be quite honest with you. But that being said, that was their choice. They put it on there. They've got enough draft equity in the bank. And at the end of the day, I think they felt like if they're not going to get a 1, he's more valuable to this equation if he's a part of it going forward for all the reasons we've talked about and Blackhawks fans know. I mean, he's just been a great player, can play up and down the lineup. He he's not old. And he's able to show, this youth movement a kind of a blueprint of how to be a pro in this league. And so a lot of things to check off when you look at what Ryan Donato brings to an organization. So my question to you is, how soon do you think we'll see this extension? I mean, do you expect to see it in the coming weeks?
I think so. And I think So in the days leading up to the trade deadline, I know I had texted you, like it sounded like Donato was preparing to be in Chicago beyond the trade deadline. And this was, I think I had heard that on Thursday. So like right the day before the trade deadline. So it sounded unlikely that Donato was going to get traded the day before. Like he was kind of prepared to be in Chicago beyond this year or beyond the trade deadline. Well, then my mind goes to, there's no way that you would keep an asset like that just for 5 more weeks and then let him walk to the open market. Like I think there is a mutual relationship between Donato and the Blackhawks, the desire to both want to have some sort of contract moving forward. And so if the Hawks felt like Donato was clear cut, I want to go to market on July 1st, I don't want to talk extension, I think that's a different story. I think if you're Chicago, then you look to move him no matter what on Friday's trade deadline. But if there's a relationship between Donato's camp and the Blackhawks saying, hey, we think there's a mutual fit here to agree to, let's say, a 3-year contract down the road, and we can get this done before you hit the summer. Like, I think that's where the Hawks felt like, okay, he's more valuable to us if our asking price isn't met. We think there's an avenue where we can get an extension done in the short term. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this deal comes sooner than later.
I love the kind of the full circle moment. The start of the season, the Every Shift cameras went out to the East Coast and followed Ryan prior to training camp. And, the quote that resonated for me was, I'm looking to find a hockey home. And that's always kind of been there. Then he has the baby. And I really do think that grounded him. And during the tough times that this team has gone through this season, when so many of the younger players could not put aside the losing skids and the slumps and whatever, I think Ryan was able to check hockey at the door and kind of focus on his family. And I think that helped him in a mindset get through a tough season. And now he's found his hockey home. So assuming that he's going to sign the extension. So I think it's a kind of a cool thing. And for a hardworking kind of a journeyman, son of a coach, it's a cool story. The question I have after watching this now a few times, actually we've had a couple of listeners to this podcast have reached out on social media on X and asked me to talk about the number of skate blades that seem to be popping off of skates, but specifically Ryan Donato in recent days. And then it happens again in Colorado on Monday night, and he makes an unbelievable pass from his knees. I've never seen that before.
It was the smoothest pass while trying to get back to the bench that I've ever seen of someone losing a skate blade. And if you go back and watch, I think that's 4 times now in the last week for Ryan Donato.
I think so. Yeah, something's going on there.
It's crazy. And if
you got to talk to 𝗵cie or something to get the inside scoop.
If you go back and watch all 4 of those, the Donato losing his skate blade, he couldn't be further from the Chicago bench. Like, this isn't in the neutral zone. This is like he's behind the goal. It's in the second period, so the bench is on the other side, and he just looks like Bambi out there trying to get back to or Bambi on ice trying to get back to the Chicago bench. So yeah, it's very bizarre. We saw Spencer Knight lose a skate blade as well in his first outing.
And that scared me. That was in his inaugural debut, and I thought that it was an injury.
Pat, the collective gasp inside the United Center was palpable. And I knew immediately what happened because I saw Spencer Knight get turned around and I saw the blade sitting there. But if you didn't see what happened in real time and you just see him and the trainer it was crazy when I like the amount of heads that rolled back when they saw Spencer Knight. But anyway, yeah, the skate blade thing, very weird. Hopefully it gets it solved because you don't want that to happen in a situation where it literally leads to a goal against.
All right. Following the Seth Jones trade, the Blackhawks go 3-0-2. Look, it's they're not world beaters by any means, but they're garnering and gathering points and not losing in regulation. So we'll take it. Alex Hlačić was asked about that surge and what was behind this 3-0-2 run. And he said, quote, "Having the young guys here has helped a lot and bring that energy. It feels like a different environment. Everybody is playing for each other and putting their bodies on the line." I think it's, Charlie, when you walk in that room, it is a completely different vibe than it was the first 3 months of the season. It started when Nazar was brought up from Rockford, and it has continued to build with the Del Mastros and the Kaisers coming and Doc's arrival. And now, you know, like last night in Colorado, we had, and Spencer Knight, and we had 10 players, 23 or under. So basically half your roster, and Levshunov making his debut. We'll get to that in a second. The young players in this organization have taken that next step. And again, it's an early step for some, it's an intermediate step for others, but it's now their room. They were kind of bystanders, or they were the young guys trying to fit into a veteran room. It's now a young player's room, and there's a couple of veterans in it.
For sure. And I think the one caution when you see half the roster 23 or younger, your immediate reaction, because that was not the case when the season started, the immediate reaction is you don't want to throw too much of them into the fire too soon and just say, hey, figure it out together. The Blackhawks have been integrating kind of one by one, whether it's calling up Frank Nazar, then it's calling up Landon Slaggert. And it's like all of those look like they belong. And so it's like when you see enough from Nazar, then you call up Slaggert. Slaggert looked like he belonged from day one. And so you start integrating these slowly but surely. And naturally, the veterans are going to start to drop in the lineup and have less of a not command inside the locker room, but then you're going to look around and you're going to be like, hey, this is our team now. You know, like yeah, we'll lean on the veterans to help guide us, but it's not, hey, let's go into our shell. Let's just let the veterans do the talking and we'll kind of lay in the weeds. Like this is their locker room now. And I think you're feeling that. And I do think there's some, after the trade deadline has passed, like I even think back to last year when the trade deadline was rolling around and it got to a point where it's like, are the Blackhawks going to trade Jason Dickinson? Are they going to trade Peter Mrazek? Are they going to trade Nick Foligno? And when all three of those guys signed 2-year contracts, it was like, okay, they're with us. Like, I know they're on a rebuilding team, and this is probably not a situation that they're thrilled to be in because they obviously want to play competitive hockey and win Stanley Cups. But when they willingly choose to want to sign an extension in Chicago, I think they look at those veterans and they're like, okay, they want to be part of our group. Similar to what we're talking about with Ryan Donato. Like with Donato, for him, he signed a 2-year deal in Chicago via free agency a couple years ago, and he has kind of made it known that he would like to stay in Chicago, or like at least internally. It's not like he openly requested a trade. Like, I want to get out of here and go play competitive hockey. It's like he wants to, like you said, find a hockey home. And so when you look around at some of the veterans that are inside the locker room, I think the young players are also looking at Foligno and Dickinson and Donato that are saying, no, we're here with you too. So like, this is our group and let's move forward together. And I think that has been rubbing off on the group as well.
Yeah. And let's not underestimate the Seth Jones situation and its impact. I think it was a real issue in that room for the weeks leading up to the trade deadline. And I think it's twofold. He was probably voicing in that room what he finally went public with just after the Four Nations break. They probably knew what was going on. The other thing is he's in a leadership role on the team, and he's playing in all situations and taking a lot of ice time. And I just felt like there's more fight, there's more energy, and I'm not putting it all on Seth, but there, to me, it can't be coincidence that the energy level and the fight and the more consistent effort over 3 periods has come to the fold since Seth was moved to Florida.
Yeah, and I don't want this to sound like a slight to Seth, but I do think it was kind of an addition by subtraction where I think Seth's mind was, I want to go play for a competitor. And even though he said, I'm not going to let it be a distraction, I'm going to give it 100% while I'm on this team, whether it's the next few weeks, the next few months, the next few years, Seth did say that publicly, but I think because he was working behind the scenes with his agent and with Kyle Davidson, trying to get him moved to a destination that he would be appealing, I think some of the guys felt that. And so when you remove that distraction from the locker room, and by the way, I still don't even blame Seth Jones for what he did, because he came to Chicago under such different circumstances and a different management. And so this is not
he could have handled, Charlie, he could have handled his exit a little cleaner than he did.
Oh,
he made it all about him.
No, for sure. I definitely agree about that. I would, and even Pat Maroon was on a Daily Faceoff podcast, I think before or after the trade happened, and said, I wouldn't have gone public with that. And so he could have handled that situation better. But I do think him internally wanting out is his right. But I do think it has been a galvanizing moment for the Blackhawks locker room, because it's kind of like, we only want guys in here that want to be with us, whether it's in the short term or the long term. And when you kind of weed out some of the guys that maybe their hearts are only half in it, you look at the Bedard's, the Nazars, the Vlasics, like they're trying to become staples of the next great Blackhawks team. Slaggerts, Colton Dachs, whatever. Like Colton Dachs standing up for Frank Nazar after he got hit by Justin Barron in the Nashville game. A lot of people had a problem with it. I had zero problem with it. I'm like, this is culture
That's
setting.
What you want. You want that.
Absolutely. And so that they're playing the long game. Like, even though it was a clean hit and even though it led to a penalty, Hawks ended up tying the game, by the way, later on, anyway. And so that's going to resonate far more in the long term, because they're like, hey, we're unified as a group.
Yes.
And so that's where I think now that the trade deadline has passed, there's more of a, hey, we're all in this together. And I think in some ways, actually, Ryan Donato staying in Chicago probably helped this group as well, because they're like, Donato easily could have said, hey, I'm having my career year, I can go play for a competitor. But he played just as hard the day after the trade deadline than he did before it. I mean, so I think the team rallies around that too.
Yeah. And like when you heard players like Pat Maroon and others like, give that guy a contract, like,
right.
You don't usually hear that, all the time. Okay. Couple things. So Foligno's comments Monday in Colorado after the game, he brought up, got rid of distractions. He mentioned it not once, but twice in a soundbite. Clearly he was referring to Seth Jones. This was not a subtle hint. This was Nick laying it out there, and I thought that was interesting. The other thing I want to point out is the comments of Spencer Knight after his first game. And it was the first time I heard a young player say, we are going to win here. I don't know if it's this year, next year, or when it's going to be, but we are going to win, and we are going to play for a championship, and that is our goal. And when I thought about it, you're not going to hear some of the older veterans say it, because in all likelihood, they weren't going to be here when this team got to a championship status or a window open to compete for a cup. So it would have kind of fallen on deaf ears if you would have heard, a Maroon or even Nick, get into, because at their age, they're just not going to be here. And it would have been premature for a Landon Slaggert or a Frank Nazar to get called up and be like, while they're trying to find their NHL way, to be like, we're going to win, and take ownership. It took a 23-year-old who uniquely had 3 years of NHL experience, comes from a championship team, and is now kind of the goalie of the future, to walk into a room, realize what is there, and then make that statement. I thought it was a really important statement. And I think, like what you said, the Donato staying, the exit of Seth, not just the influx of youth, but the right pieces, and this Spencer Knight addition, to think you've got your Bedard, and we're starting to see the pieces on the back end and throughout the lineup, and now you've got your goalie. Like, wow, I just thought, like, put that together, and that resonates. That's not just a player standing in front of their stall giving lip service and telling the fans what they want to hear. I felt everything he said he believed, and I think he spoke for the young guys in that room, Spencer Knight, on that particular night.
It's an excellent point, because for Spencer Knight, 23 years old, won a Stanley Cup as a backup in Florida. Even he was saying at the morning skate before his first start, like, I was not expecting a trade. I was so surprised. And for him to show up the next day, like, he flew into Chicago the night before. So I think it was Sunday night. Correct. He plays on Monday, and at a 41 save performance. And then he said it to Darren Pang after being named the first star. He said it when he got the team belt. He's saying, I don't care if we're 31st or first, we're going to win expletive hockey games, right? And it's to have that attitude after your world just got rocked, like, in a trade that year. It was, because I wouldn't have blamed him if he was kind of like, I need to process all this before I can. He was ready to go, and I think the guys fed off that.
That's the thing. How he handled it is one thing. How he handled it in that time frame was mind-boggling to me. One thing is a player that kind of knows they're on the trade block. For him, it had to catch him totally off guard. He's in a room where they're gearing up to defend their championship. He's playing well. I think he had won 3 in a row at that point with Florida. And to get the call that you're traded to a team that's early on in a rebuild, to get to that city and then, just try to get your bearing straight. When they ask, it would have been everything in his right to say, yeah, you know what, give me Monday night off, let me play the next game. No, I want to go. And then, like, the first period he played, he saw as many shots on him that he did in the previous 60 minutes he played for Florida. So, like, he was thrown right into the fire. Mentally, he handled it well. Physically, he handled it well.
Right. And I think if you're a guy like Connor Bedard, if you're a guy like Frank Nazar, some of the young pieces, Alex Vlasic, and you now see the arrival of a player like Spencer Knight, who we've raved about him off the ice, but even on the ice, just watching him for a few minutes, like, he had 10 saves in his first 7 minutes of action in his Blackhawks debut.
And there were a lot of high danger in there.
He was peppered. There were a lot of other shot attempts within that as well. To see how technically sound he was, what of an elite puck handling goalie he is, an amazing skater too. Just the way, I think when I was watching him, I was like, they got a real goalie. Like, and this isn't, I want to be careful on how I say this, because he still has a ways to go to get here, but there's always, like, the top tier goalies of, like, the Andrei Vasilevskys, the Sergei Bobrovskys, the Jake Ottingers, right? The Connor Hellebucks. Then you get to, like, the middle tier. And sometimes that dangerous middle tier is what is teams will overpay for goaltenders, like Calgary, Jacob Markstrom. He's like, he's not in the top tier, but he's in the middle tier, right? Spencer Knight has the opportunity or the potential to be in that top tier with the Jake Ottingers. And if he gets to that level And I think a lot of the Blackhawks locker room is probably looking at like, this guy's a special goalie. If he hits, that is so motivating to what it could do long-term for the rebuild. Because if you have a goalie like that, where every single night he's in the net, he can stand on his head for a 41 save performance and he's doing it effortlessly, it masks some of the flaws that, like, if defensemen do make mistakes, he'll be able to mask some of those. But also at the same time, it helps elevate the floor and the ceiling of the rebuilding team, where it's like, okay, let's go. We got our goaltender of the future. And I think that's highly motivating for guys inside the locker room.
Let's talk about the number 2 overall pick from last year's draft. Artyom Levshunov made his NHL debut Monday night in Colorado. And you talk about being thrown into the fire. When he was called up on Sunday, I started checking around, and I assumed San Jose would be his. I figured they'd take the opportunity to have at least one practice with him, and that San Jose might be a better way to dip your toe in the NHL waters versus going to Colorado. They've made all these changes. They've become one of the deeper teams in the NHL. They've won 5 in a row, on and on and on. And no, he gets baptism by fire. And his D partner, Alec Martinez, leaves in the first period. So he's got, Del Mastro with him at one point. He's got Kai. I mean, it was a potpourri of D pairings the rest of the way. The guy plays nearly 21 minutes, 3 shots on goal. He'd make some mistakes, but I liked his recovery. What did you think of Artyom Levshunov's NHL debut, Charlie?
So I was right there with you. I saw the call up happened, and I was like, okay, he now has to travel to Colorado. The Hawks are not practicing, so they have a full morning skate the next day in Colorado on a game day. I'm thinking opportunity is probably laying the groundwork for the San Jose game, because he can get a couple morning skates, a practice in, get acclimated to his D partner, whatever, lesser opponent, all the. It seemed like it was on track to start in San Jose. So in my mind, I was like, okay, well, what's the urgency to call him up now? Well, then you see the line rushes happen on Monday, and I was like, looks like he's going to get thrown into the fire. And when I watched the Anders Sorensen interview and he was asked about that specifically, he's like, why not? It's the NHL. You got to play against the best. And I was like, okay, all right, they're throwing him in there. Well, then I watched the Artyom Levshunov morning skate video, and I think it was Mark Lazarus that had asked him, he's like, are you nervous at all? And he's like, why? Why would I be nervous? It's just hockey. And I was like, that's his attitude off the ice, but that is the way that I saw him play on the ice too. Like, I didn't see any timidness. Was it the first or the second shift of the game where Ross Colton knocked his stick out of his hands, and he just is going to follow Ross Colton? I'm sure when he got back to the bench, some of the Chicago players were like, I don't know if you want to mess with that guy. But It just showed his, like, I don't care who you are, and I don't care if I'm a rookie as a 19-year-old playing in my first NHL game. I don't mind playing my style and playing it in a confident manner. And so I was highly impressed. The first shift of the game, also, I noticed that the puck had started in the D zone, and he immediately looked for the first opportunity to join in on the rush. And you saw the skating, like his elite skating on display. And I was like, okay, this guy is confident. He's aggressive. He's playing to his strengths. And that 5-on-3 power play that Chicago had in the second period, I thought was the difference in the hockey game, because they got nothing going. And it was Levshunov that was like, I'll take ownership of this and fire two pucks on net. And those were the only 2 chances that Chicago got in that power play. So I loved his confidence and the poise that he displayed in that first game.
Yeah, and look, he's 19 and he's got a ways to go, but boy, the foundation and the floor on this guy is already very high. I can't wait to see him achieve, the greatness that seemingly is going to happen. He was impressive. And again, very difficult circumstances against a fast freaking team, one of the best players in the league, and I mean a team that was humming. It was, if you were looking, I mean, again, we don't get into moral victories in this business, but like if you picked up your phone and said, "Oh, yep, Colorado won 3-0. It was their 6th straight win," that's about what I would have expected. You didn't see the game because the game was very, very even. A zip game going to the 3rd period. The shots on goal were 21 apiece. The scoring chances were 26-23 in favor of the Avs, and the high danger was actually 10-8 in favor of the Hawks. So Hawks actually, I would say, it was their power play. They go 0 for 4 on the man advantage. A lot of those they didn't get full power plays because they'd had some penalties subsequently.
And I'll say this, Pat, too, like, because I said something similar on the post-game show where if you didn't watch the game and you see, 21 save shutout by Scott Wedgwood, it's like, no, you didn't see some of those saves that he was making because, I mean, at least half of them were like, what? Those were surefire goals.
The Bedard, where he stacks the pad and throws his left pad in the air and, catches Bedard's howitzer that was going to the top of the net, corner of the net. Like, I mean, it was amazing. What did you think of the offside challenge? Did you think there was enough clear evidence that was indeed offside?
Yeah, so it was funny because when I'm in the studio for road games, I have the TV broadcast so I can listen to Rick and Darren Pang. And I have the radio broadcast where I can listen to John and Troy. And so I have both of them on to try to, and it's actually hilarious how in sync they usually are. And both of the broadcasts immediately were like, oh, this is going to get overturned right away. Hawks are going to win this challenge. Well, the longer the review goes on, the more you're like, oh no, is this a situation again where it was pushing the puck over the blue line, then retouching, and then, you almost kind of forget that it's now, your skate doesn't need to be making contact with the blue line. Right. It's just hovering it. Right. So I think the broadcast did a really good job of breaking it down frame by frame, but there was that one in between frame where the puck was on the blue line. And then the next frame, the puck was like well into the offensive zone. So you just couldn't get that frame in between to see whether it was actually offside. But when you put it together, it certainly looked like it was offside. And so it was funny because, like, if it got overturned or if the goal stood, boy, oh boy, both broadcasters, probably both Darren and Troy, probably would have lost it because it was close.
Well, Rick's adamant that he doesn't want challenges for offside calls. I think that's a little extreme, but I will say a couple things. It is a waste of everybody's time showing any other camera angle than the blue line angle, because we've all seen how the optical illusion when you're behind, how it can look like the skate is in the offensive zone, but actually it's hovering right over the blue line. You just can't tell until it would be like you're trying to figure out if the nose of the football breaks the plane of the goal line, and you were using a camera that is not on the goal line or that's in the end zone or in the stands. You would never do that. You would always go to, as long as it wasn't blocked by a player, you would always turn to the camera on the goal line to decide whether or not a ball breaks the plane. Same thing with whether a skate is above the blue line, whether the puck has crossed the line or not. Like, stop wasting our time and like keeping the blue line angle to the situation room to themselves. Like, I don't understand that. And here's the other thing: maybe put a time limit on it. And if the situation room can't decide whether it's offside or not in a 2-minute span, let's put 2 minutes on it, or 90, whatever it is, then the call on the ice stands.
Right.
Like, I felt last night that went too long.
Yeah. I can't even remember. What was the original call on the ice? Was it a good goal or?
Yeah, it was a good goal.
Okay, so clearly they saw enough to overturn it, which I guess is encouraging. But yeah, and how long did the challenge go? It felt like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it was probably under that, but it was probably in the 3 to 4 minute range, and I just think that
Right.
that's too long. You put a time limit on it. If you, with all the technology, can't determine if it's onside or offside, then the call on the ice stands. And, again, maybe that's not, maybe that's, a juvenile way to look at it, but
well, here's another thing that I would recommend that the NHL does too, because I think the officials that are inside the building have the final say on whether it's offside or not. But like, why not have an official eye in the sky where they're reviewing this already? Like, Matt Meacham and Adam Gill are sitting there in the Blackhawks room, and they're monitoring every zone entry. Right. So the second they're challenging for an offside, they already know it's going to get overturned if it's very blatant. So like, why waste the time of the officials having to go put on the headset, watch the iPad, and then seeing what an official in Toronto or that's in the building just sitting in the press box watching it or wherever, that can already just voice to the, hey, this is offside clearly. Yeah. You can go confirm it. It just saves a lot of time.
Yeah, good point. All right, let's close with Jonathan Toews. He spoke to Mark Lazarus of The Athletic. A couple months back, there was the GQ article where John came out saying, like, he's not retired, that he is, went to India and has been doing a lot of trying to find out exactly what has gone on with his body over the last handful of years. He's still, like, in the piece with The Athletic, he said he doesn't feel doctors can actually pinpoint exactly what he is going through. We talked about the chronic inflammatory response syndrome, the long COVID that he had. That all being said, he still thinks he has something left in the tank, and he's on the ice in Arizona the last couple of weeks. He asked to have his gear sent from Fifth Third Arena, which I think is a huge step. And man, if he wants to give this a shot, he's going to be 37 next month.
Yeah.
Hey, go for it.
Yeah. So to be clear, before we even get to my thoughts on this, Jonathan Toews made it clear in the article with Mark Lazarus that the Chicago door has closed, even on his end. He was like, if I do return and come back, I would like it to be where I don't have this spotlight hanging over me and the pressure of being the captain, the icon, the 3 Stanley Cups, right? So let's just shut the door on that before we get into it. Okay, so a couple thoughts. When Jonathan Toews did the GQ interview in December saying leaving the door open for a comeback, quite honestly, it was like half-hearted to me. I was like, okay, cool. Like he's leaving the door open. I don't know how serious he is about it. But for him to double down now as we're getting closer to, Stanley Cup playoffs and Jonathan Toews is actually on the ice skating the last couple of weeks, I'm like, okay, interesting. Like he's really serious about this. I thought it was interesting that he said, I'm not really sure exactly how feasible this is going to be until I start skating with NHL players over the summer to see how behind I am, whether I can actually do this. He even acknowledged there's only one way to find out is whether the speed of the game has passed me by. But I'll say this, there's a part of me that there's a part of me that just doesn't want him to return because I just want to see him in a Blackhawks sweater only. But there's another part of me that's really rooting for him, for him to make a return and leave the game on his terms. And so it's this wrestle between, like, what a way to go out where final game at the United Center, he scores a goal, gets that send off, lifelong Blackhawk. But there's another part of me that's like, if he is in a really good headspace, he's feeling physically great, he still feels like he has more to give and can contribute on a team. There's a part of me that's like, that would be pretty cool to see Jonathan Toews again in a sweater when I kind of close that chapter in my mind.
He sat out 2021. He hasn't played since April of 2023. If you hear from his former teammates and some coaches, those last couple years were arduous for him. Like, he was exhausted. He couldn't put any of the of the time and effort that he normally did to prepare his body to play in the National Hockey League. I heard at times he'd get on the bike and he just couldn't give anything. And I think you saw it on the ice. He was, you know, he was not in shape for obvious reasons. And to see him, and it sounded like the one thing we heard from that GQ article that was, you know, he's lost a ton of weight. The opportunity for him to, again, go out on his terms, I think would be fantastic. And I can put aside, you know, the awkwardness of seeing him in a different uniform and playing a fourth line role on a good team. But I think it'd be a friggin' awesome story. And, you know, good for Johnny if he's able to pull this off. And I think it's going to be, it's a great little story for us to keep an eye on throughout the summer as we get breadcrumbs dropped of whether or not, you know, because I mean, there will be, you know, if he decides to, I got to think there'll be a couple of teams that will give him a shot with a standard, you know, veteran contract.
Yeah, I think it would be a very kind of veteran minimum-ish league contract with bonus driven, you know, like hit X amount of goals or X amount of points or X amount of games, ice time, whatever, all that stuff where he can earn some extra money along the way. So yeah, it is going to be fascinating to continue to watch this storyline. And I will say the one area that I think teams would be salivating, not just getting Jonathan Toews, the potential two-way center, is that guy feels like he could take 3 years off of hockey, get dropped into a game and still win like 60% of his faceoffs. So like that's still a valuable part of the equation too.
All right. Anything else before we exit?
I'm good. This is a good reunion podcast.
Yeah, I do. On our next podcast, I do want to talk about 𝗏𝗏, the general manager of Carolina, who was in the running for GM in Chicago, and thank goodness he didn't get the job, and Kyle Davidson is the GM, because man, oh man, 𝗏𝗏 has made some major mistakes over the last couple of seasons. Well, we'll get into that at a later date. That is going to do it for the Blackhawks Breakaway podcast for CHSM. For 𝗏cie𝗰𝗶𝗟 𝗟𝗏, I'm Pat Boyle. Thanks for watching and listening, and we will catch you next time.